World War III. A phrase that sends shivers down the spine. It evokes images of nuclear mushroom clouds, tanks rolling across vast battlefields, and soldiers locked in desperate combat. But what if I told you that World War III isn't something in the future? What if it's already begun, not with bombs or bullets, but through methods far more insidious? Today, we'll explore a controversial idea that the Third World War is not on the horizon, it's here. And the battlefield? It's everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Economic warfare is one of the most potent tools of modern conflict. Unlike traditional warfare, which relies on physical destruction, economic warfare targets industries, currencies, and livelihoods. It's a way to destabilize nations from within without firing a single shot. Consider Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. In response, the United States and its allies imposed sweeping sanctions, cutting Russian banks off from the SWIFT payment system, freezing billions in foreign reserves, and targeting exports of oil and gas. These measures aim to cripple Russia's economy, forcing its leadership to reconsider its aggression. However, sanctions are a double-edged sword. In Europe, heavily reliant on Russian energy, gas prices soared, blackouts loomed, and inflation rose sharply. Globally, supply chain disruptions and rising food prices hit developing nations the hardest. The US-China trade war offers another example. Initially framed as a dispute over trade imbalances, it quickly evolved into a battle for technological supremacy. The United States blacklisted Huawei, crippling China's ambitions in 5G technology, while China retaliated by restricting rare earth metal exports critical to electronics and renewable energy. These actions disrupted global supply chains, forcing businesses to adapt while driving up consumer costs. But economic warfare has its ethical dilemmas. Sanctions often harm civilians more than governments. In Venezuela, sanctions exacerbated a humanitarian crisis, leaving millions without food, medicine, or basic services. This raises a troubling question. At what point does economic pressure cross the line into collective punishment? Economic warfare also destabilizes global systems, creating ripple effects far beyond its intended targets. Inflation, social unrest, and political instability can spread like wildfire, affecting nations that had no part in the original conflict. Are we prepared for a world where the global economy itself becomes a battlefield? And how do we ensure these measures achieve their objectives without causing more harm than good? If economic warfare targets economies, the information war targets societies. In the digital age, controlling narratives and perceptions has become as critical as controlling territory. This is a battlefield where propaganda, fake news, and disinformation spread faster than ever before. Consider Russia's alleged interference in the 2016 US presidential election. Through troll farms, fake accounts, and targeted ads, Russian operatives used social media to amplify divisive narratives and undermine trust in democratic institutions. The result? A fractured society and a polarized electorate. This wasn't just meddling in an election, it was an attack on the fabric of democracy itself. China, too, has been accused of leveraging platforms like TikTok to subtly influence global narratives. Meanwhile, Western nations use their own media networks to shape perceptions about foreign adversaries. Even private companies play a role. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement often prioritize sensational or divisive content, deepening societal divides. Disinformation campaigns aren't limited to elections. They're also used to justify military actions, undermine adversaries, and shape global perceptions. For example, the narratives surrounding the war in Ukraine are a battlefield in their own right, with both Russia and Western allies presenting conflicting versions of events to rally support. The psychological toll of the information war is immense. Trust in institutions erodes, communities fracture and societies struggle to address larger challenges like climate change or public health crises. How do we navigate a world where truth itself is under siege? And what role do individuals play in resisting manipulation? The stakes are high. Misinformation fuels extremism, weakens social cohesion, and creates fertile ground for further conflict. If we lose the battle for truth, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for democracy, but for humanity as a whole. Cyber warfare is the invisible war of the 21st century. Unlike traditional battles, there are no physical front lines. Instead, hackers infiltrate networks, disrupt critical infrastructure, and steal sensitive data, all with devastating consequences. The 2021 Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in the United States highlighted the devastating potential of cyber attacks. Hackers infiltrated the pipeline systems, shutting down fuel distribution across the eastern U.S. Panic buying ensued, leading to widespread shortages and economic losses. This incident was a wake-up call, exposing the vulnerabilities of critical infrastructure. Ukraine has faced relentless cyber attacks for nearly a decade, making it a testing ground for cyber warfare. In 2015, hackers believed to be affiliated with Russia targeted Ukraine's power grid, leaving tens of thousands without electricity during winter. Subsequent attacks targeted government agencies, financial institutions, and transportation systems, undermining public confidence and disrupting daily life. These incidents demonstrate how cyber attacks can be as destructive as traditional military operations. Espionage is another dimension of cyber warfare. In 2020, the SolarWinds breach revealed how sophisticated hackers, believed to be Russian operatives, gained access to U.S. government agencies and private companies. Sensitive data was exposed, potentially compromising national security. China, too, has been accused of cyber theft, targeting intellectual property from industries ranging from pharmaceuticals to aerospace. But here's the question: if nations are already engaged in these silent cyber battles, does this mean World War III is unfolding before our eyes? And if the next major attack disrupts power grids or financial systems, who should be held accountable? Should citizens demand transparency from governments, or would revealing cyber strategies only make us more vulnerable? The nature of cyber warfare blurs the line between war and peace. Unlike conventional attacks, cyber incidents are difficult to attribute with certainty, making retaliation a complex and risky endeavor. When adversaries operate through anonymous proxies or state-affiliated groups, how do nations respond without escalating conflicts? Are we prepared for the possibility that the next world war may not involve soldiers on a battlefield but hackers behind computer screens? And if that's the case, is society investing enough in defensive strategies to protect critical systems? As technology advances, artificial intelligence and machine learning are enabling cyber attacks to evolve faster than defenses. Nations are locked in a cyber arms race, pouring resources into offensive and defensive capabilities. But does this mean smaller nations and ordinary citizens are the real casualties of these digital wars? How do we ensure that technological progress doesn't become a weapon that undermines the very society it's meant to enhance? Proxy wars have become a defining feature of modern conflict, allowing major powers to avoid direct confrontation while pursuing their geopolitical interests. These wars are fought in the shadows, often using smaller nations as battlegrounds, with devastating consequences for local populations. The war in Ukraine exemplifies the complexity and danger of proxy conflicts. What began as a regional dispute escalated into a global flashpoint. Western nations, led by NATO, have funneled billions in military aid, weapons, and intelligence to Ukraine, effectively turning the country into a front line against Russian aggression. Meanwhile, Russia's actions have turned Ukraine into a testing ground for its military tactics and technologies. The result is a prolonged and brutal conflict with no clear resolution in sight. Syria offers another tragic example. The Syrian civil war, which started as an uprising against the Assad regime, quickly devolved into a proxy war involving the United States, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. Each nation backed different factions, turning the conflict into a geopolitical chessboard. The consequences were catastrophic: over 500,000 dead, millions displaced, and a country left in ruins. Proxy wars are not a new phenomenon. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in indirect conflicts in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Angola. However, today's proxy wars are more complex and interconnected, often involving multiple actors with conflicting agendas. This makes them harder to resolve and increases the risk of escalation. Here's a controversial question: are proxy wars a more acceptable form of global conflict, or are they simply a cowardly way for superpowers to pursue their goals at the expense of smaller nations? Should international law more strongly penalize nations that engage in proxy warfare? And what responsibility do major powers have for the long-term damage caused in these regions? The danger of proxy wars lies in their unpredictability. A single miscalculation, such as an accidental strike on NATO territory, could escalate into a broader conflict. History reminds us how quickly localized disputes can spiral out of control. World War I began with an assassination in a relatively minor conflict, yet it set off a chain reaction that engulfed the world. Could Ukraine or another proxy conflict become the spark for World War III? And if major powers continue to use smaller nations as battlegrounds, should the global community hold them accountable for the lives and futures destroyed in the process? Nuclear weapons have loomed over humanity as the ultimate deterrent and the ultimate threat. Since their creation, they have fundamentally shaped global politics, preventing large-scale wars through the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. However, this fragile peace rests on a precarious assumption that rational actors will always prevail. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 is a stark reminder of how close the world has come to nuclear war. For 13 tense days, the United States and the Soviet Union teetered on the brink of annihilation, saved only by last-minute diplomacy. Today, the risks are even greater, with more nations possessing nuclear weapons and technologies evolving at a rapid pace. Cyber warfare adds a new layer of complexity. Imagine if hackers compromised a nuclear facility or missile system. Could a rogue cyber attack trigger an unintended launch? If nations are already competing for supremacy in cyberspace, should we be more concerned about the intersection of digital warfare and nuclear arsenals? Meanwhile, nuclear doctrines are shifting. Some nations are moving away from commitments to no first-use policies, increasing the likelihood of preemptive strikes. Hypersonic missile technology, which drastically reduces response times, compresses decision-making windows to minutes. Does this escalation in capability make nuclear war more likely, or does it strengthen deterrence? Here's a divisive question for you. Are nuclear weapons still a necessary evil for maintaining peace, or should the world push harder for complete disarmament? Can we trust nations to give up their arsenals in good faith, or does the presence of nuclear weapons serve as the ultimate safeguard against global war? As tensions rise between the United States, Russia, and China, the likelihood of a nuclear incident grows. Should global citizens demand more robust treaties and oversight to prevent escalation? Or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past because of national pride and power struggles? As if existing conflicts weren't enough, climate change is emerging as a new kind of battleground. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and resource scarcity are already fueling tensions across the globe, with dire implications for the future. The Arctic has become a geopolitical hotspot as melting ice opens new shipping routes and reveals untapped reserves of oil and gas. Major powers like Russia, the United States, and Canada are vying for control of this increasingly accessible region. But should nations even have the right to exploit these resources? If climate change is caused by overconsumption, does further exploitation of the Arctic amount to global hypocrisy? In sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, the impacts of climate change are driving displacement and unrest. For example, the Syrian civil war was partly triggered by a severe drought. Should nations that contribute most to climate change bear responsibility for its consequences? And how do we prevent resource conflicts from escalating into larger wars? Rising sea levels and mass migrations pose additional challenges. How should countries handle the influx of climate refugees? Should wealthier nations provide more resources to mitigate the effects of climate change in vulnerable regions? Or does this shift accountability away from local governments? Climate change also exposes global inequalities. If richer nations can adapt while poorer ones suffer, does this fuel resentment and pave the way for new conflicts? And if governments fail to address these imbalances, could climate change itself become the spark for future wars? These questions demand answers. Can the world use the climate crisis as an opportunity for cooperation and peace building, or will inaction turn it into the catalyst for the next great conflict? So, has World War III already begun? If we redefine war as more than just physical combat, the answer is yes. It's happening all around us, in our economies, our information systems, and our digital networks. The battlefield is everywhere, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The real question is, what can we do? Awareness is the first step. By understanding these conflicts, we can demand accountability, resist manipulation, and build resilience in our communities. The choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow. This is a conversation we need to have, because the war of the future isn't coming. It's already here. Thank you for watching. If this video made you think, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with others. Let's bring this conversation to the forefront, because what we think is the war of the future may already be a reality. If it will escalate into a direct conflict among superpowers, only time will tell us.